Forget expensive supplements for a second. Some of the biggest levers on your testosterone are small daily habits, and the evidence behind them is stronger than most people realize. Sleep. One of the simplest ways to raise testosterone doesn't involve any supplement at all: sleep. In a landmark study, healthy young men who slept only 5 hours a night for 1 week saw testosterone drop by 10 to 15%. That's a hormonal effect comparable to aging 10 to 15 years. Most of your daily testosterone production is tied to deep sleep stages, not just time spent in bed. The fix isn't complicated. Consistently getting 7 to 9 hours is one of the most reliable levers you actually control. Caffeine timing matters too. Taken right before a workout, it can actually add to your training's hormonal spike. But that same caffeine, taken late in the day, disrupts the deep sleep stages where testosterone is actually made. A common rule of thumb is cutting off caffeine at least 10 hours before bedtime. Sleep apnea is genuinely linked to lower testosterone, since it fragments the deep sleep stages hormones depend on. But here's the myth to correct. Multiple meta-analyses on CPAP treatment found no significant increase in testosterone from treating the apnea alone. Sleep quality matters as much as quantity. Frequent nighttime awakenings can blunt the deep sleep-driven testosterone release, even if total hours look adequate. Blue light from phones and TVs late at night suppresses melatonin, which can delay and shorten the deep sleep stages where testosterone peaks. Weekend catch-up sleep helps somewhat, but it doesn't fully reverse the hormonal cost of a week of short nights. Consistency matters more than compensating later. Body fat. Carrying excess body fat doesn't just affect how you look, it actively lowers testosterone. Fat tissue contains an enzyme called aromatase, which converts testosterone directly into estrogen. The more fat you carry, the more of this conversion happens. In one well-cited study, men who lost about 10% of their body weight saw testosterone rise by 10 to 15% with no medication involved. This is one of the few interventions where the evidence is genuinely strong, not just correlational. Testosterone is synthesized directly from cholesterol, so diets extremely low in fat can blunt hormone production. Whole food sources of zinc, magnesium, and healthy fats, eggs, fatty fish, pumpkin seeds, give your body the raw materials it actually needs. Visceral fat, the fat stored around your organs specifically, appears to have a stronger relationship with lower testosterone than fat stored elsewhere on the body. This creates a cycle. Lower testosterone can make it easier to gain fat, and more fat further lowers testosterone, reinforcing itself over time. You don't need an extreme diet to see this effect. Moderate, sustainable fat loss over months shows up clearly across the studies on this topic. Resistance training. Lifting weights, especially heavy compound movements, triggers a short-term testosterone spike. Exercises like squats and deadlifts, which use large muscle groups, produce a bigger acute hormonal response than isolated exercises. That single spike doesn't last long, but consistent resistance training over months is linked to better baseline hormone profiles. It's not about one workout. It's about repeating the stimulus for years, not weeks. Most research points to training large muscle groups at 70 to 85% of your max effort, 3 to 4 times a week. But more isn't always better. Extreme, prolonged steady-state cardio raises cortisol enough to actively blunt testosterone. Full-body compound movements also trigger a larger growth hormone response alongside testosterone, compounding the overall anabolic environment. Beginners tend to see the largest relative hormonal benefits from starting a resistance program, since the body is adapting to an entirely new stimulus. Even short resistance sessions, 20 to 30 minutes of focused compound lifting, are enough to trigger the acute hormonal response research measures. Alcohol. Alcohol is one of the most direct testosterone suppressors most men underestimate. It disrupts the signaling pathway between your brain and your testes, reducing testosterone production at the source. Chronic heavy drinking is associated with significantly lower testosterone in multiple studies. This doesn't mean total abstinence is required, but consistent heavy drinking is one of the more avoidable hits to your hormone levels. Alcohol also raises cortisol acutely, compounding the direct suppression of the brain-to-testes signaling pathway. Heavy drinking is additionally linked to higher estrogen levels in men, partly through impaired liver processing of hormones. Chronic stress. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, and testosterone share an inverse relationship. High cortisol physically suppresses the signaling that tells your testes to produce testosterone. This isn't about occasional stress. Short bursts are normal. It's chronic, unmanaged stress that does the damage. Simple stress reduction habits, better sleep, exercise, downtime, aren't just good for your mood. They protect this specific hormonal pathway. Chronic stress also tends to disrupt sleep, creating a second, indirect pathway that further suppresses testosterone. Simple daily practices, brief walks, breathing exercises, or short breaks have been shown to measurably lower cortisol in controlled studies. Vitamin D and sunlight. Vitamin D functions more like a hormone than a vitamin, and your testes are covered in receptors for it. Correcting an actual vitamin D deficiency has been shown to raise total testosterone by an average of 20%. Regular sunlight exposure is the simplest way most people can maintain healthy levels. But if your levels are already normal, more sun or more supplementation won't push testosterone any higher. Vitamin D deficiency is extremely common, especially in people who spend most of their day indoors or live in northern latitudes with less sunlight. A simple blood test measuring 25-hydroxyvitamin D is the standard way doctors check your actual level. Testicular temperature. Your testes sit outside your body for a reason. Testosterone and sperm production work best a couple of degrees cooler than your core body temperature. The specific evidence here is mostly about sperm production rather than testosterone directly, so treat this as a reasonable precaution, not a guaranteed hormone hack. Simple precautions: loose boxers instead of tight compression underwear, and avoiding heated car seats or a hot laptop resting directly on your lap. Occupations involving prolonged sitting, like long-haul truck driving, have been associated with higher scrotal temperatures and lower sperm counts in some studies. None of this requires expensive gear, just basic awareness of prolonged heat exposure in that area. Olive oil. One small human study on 60 Moroccan men found that just 25 milliliters of extra virgin olive oil daily raised testosterone by about 17% after 3 weeks. Luteinizing hormone, which signals your body to produce testosterone, rose by over 40% in the same study. This is one study with 60 people, not dozens of trials, so treat it as promising rather than definitive. The proposed mechanism involves oleic acid and antioxidant compounds in olive oil supporting the function of Leydig cells, the cells in the testes that actually produce testosterone. Extra virgin, cold-pressed olive oil retains more of these antioxidant compounds than heavily refined versions. Cold exposure. Cold plunges and ice baths have become a popular biohacking trend, often claimed to spike testosterone. But the actual evidence is mixed at best. Several controlled studies found no significant testosterone increase from cold exposure alone. One well-known study even found testosterone dropped about 10% during cold water exposure. Some smaller studies combining cold exposure with exercise or sauna use found modest, short-lived increases, but nothing close to a reliable standalone effect. If your goal is testosterone specifically, exercise and sleep have far stronger evidence behind them than cold water alone. Part of the appeal may simply be the alertness and mood boost cold exposure provides, which gets mentally associated with feeling more energized or primed, even without a hormonal change. The drive to compete. Testosterone doesn't just influence behavior, it also responds to it. Winning a competition has been shown to raise testosterone in the hours afterward. This is sometimes called the winner effect, and it's been replicated across multiple lab and real-world competitions. Losing tends to do the opposite, lowering testosterone and reducing the drive to compete again. The findings aren't perfectly consistent across every single study, but the overall pattern, that status and competition genuinely shift hormone levels, is well documented. This isn't limited to sports either. Competitive workplace situations and even video games have shown similar hormonal patterns in some studies. Sugar and insulin resistance. Chronically high blood sugar and insulin resistance are linked to lower testosterone in multiple studies. Insulin resistance often travels together with excess body fat, making it hard to fully separate the two factors. Still, managing blood sugar through diet is considered one of the more reliable supporting habits, alongside body fat and sleep. Frequent blood sugar spikes are also associated with elevated SHBG in some studies, which binds up more of your testosterone regardless of how much your body actually produces. Endocrine disruptors. Certain plastics and chemicals, like BPA found in some food containers, can mimic estrogen in the body. Research on how much this specifically affects human testosterone levels is still developing, and effect sizes vary between studies. Simple precautions, avoiding heating food in plastic and reducing exposure where practical, are reasonable even if the exact hormonal impact isn't fully settled. Canned foods lined with BPA-based resin and certain receipts made of thermal paper are lesser-known sources people often don't think about. recovery, and overtraining. More training isn't automatically better. Overtraining without adequate recovery is linked to chronically suppressed testosterone. This is essentially chronic stress by another name. Your body responds to unrecovered training load the same way it responds to other stressors. Building in rest days and avoiding constant high-intensity training is part of the same hormonal picture as managing stress. Signs of overtraining include persistent fatigue, declining performance despite consistent effort, and disrupted sleep, worth watching for if you train intensely. Zinc-Rich Foods. Zinc deficiency is one of the more well-established nutritional links to low testosterone. Oysters, red meat, and shellfish are some of the richest natural sources. As with vitamin D, this mainly matters if you're actually deficient. Correcting a real deficiency helps, but more zinc on top of already sufficient levels won't push testosterone higher. Vegetarians and vegans may be at higher risk of subclinical zinc deficiency, since plant-based zinc sources are less bioavailable than animal sources.